how do you help people balance any anxiety they might have around, if I'm listening, I'm not being heard?
It's such an important question. And I think it's important to approach this investment in listening and know that the goal is not to become what I call a listening martyr, which is where you become a
Right.
vessel for someone else, right? And you're just receiving them, and you're so good at listening that people kind of are attracted to you for that, and you're just, yeah, you're a vessel for them. In some ways, that's really what a therapist can
Right.
can be can be there for, or another kind of listening professional. But that's not necessarily the role that you want to lean into in your everyday relationships, for the reasons that you mentioned of, it's really important for you to have your voice heard too. And frankly, connection comes when both parties are participating and when both parties
Right.
feel heard. So it is a give and take. And I think that, as you're able to focus on listening and create a different kind of relationship, in some ways, I think it comes down to modeling that behavior, right? The more that I do that and show you what that's like, I think for most people, they're going to clue into, oh, something interesting is happening here, and feel connected and want to return the favor in some way. And so I think that's
Right.
really important. And, if that's not happening, there's many things that you can do to cut a conversation short and say, hey, I got to go, if you're really not getting that.
That might be the key takeaway from this entire our conversation is here's how you exit a conversation that's not much of a conversation. Is there something that differentiates? Can you point to something that differentiates a standard conversation from a great conversation? Something where you're like, normally I'm at 6 out of 10 or 6.5 out of 10. But for some reason, that conversation was 9 out of 10. It had a kind of magic to it. Are there elements that you've noticed to go, this is it, this is what you're looking for?
Yes. So I think that most of the time we're operating under what I call surface listening. So this
Mm,
is when we're hearing enough of the conversation to be polite, to nod and smile. You're catching a little bit of, you're catching the literal. Um,
yeah.
the really great conversations, I think, are when you're catching what's happening at the literal, and then you're also catching the subtext or
Yeah.
meaning, and then you're also catching emotion. What is
Mm,
happening for this other person emotionally? What does this topic mean to this other person? What am I learning about this other person?
right.
And I think the difference there is in how we listen. And one of the most important things that differentiates those is bringing in what I call a listening mindset, and that's
Mm,
humility, curiosity, and empathy. And
yes.
those three ingredients, when you set the intention to bring them in, completely change the nature of the conversation.
How do I become literate at hearing emotion? Like, it's one thing to say, you listen, you get a sense of how the other person is feeling, but if you don't have a vocabulary or you don't know what to you're just deaf to that. How do you start becoming less deaf to what might be going on at that level?
I think that's where some of these qualities come in. So humility
Mm,
is when you're there to learn from the other person.
right,
And
right.
I think that puts the other person in the driver's seat, in a way
Mm.
that often we come into conversation with an opinion or a preconceived notion or an
Yeah,
assumption or a point we want to prove. The list goes on and on. And so the first step is saying, okay, all of those things can be true, but I'm going to set them aside because I'm here to learn from this other person.
yeah.
Curiosity is what's really allowing you to go deeper. And I think this is particularly useful when, let's say, the person is talking about something that you're not naturally interested in. It's really
Right,
easy in those moments just to tune out. If someone's saying something
right.
that we're like, oh, I love that movie. Great. We can listen. If it's something that we're not that interested in, we often are, our mind is elsewhere, or we're trying to
Yep.
figure out how we can change the conversation topic to something we do like. And so it's
Yeah, yeah.
important to ask instead, like, okay, what else can I learn here? What is this person,
Mm,
what can they teach me? And find the common thread that can keep you engaged in conversation, whatever that may be. And
Yes.
then empathy is that it's sort of like if the doorway is being cracked open, empathy, opens the door even more to being able to get to that emotional place that you're talking about. And that's really understanding another person's experience. It doesn't mean that you have to share in that exact experience. It just means that you, at the core, can relate on a level of feelings. And so, for instance, if
Yeah.
someone says, gosh, I'm having a really hard time with my manager, I feel like they're undermining me, or whatever it may be. Maybe you've never had a manager who's undermined you, but
You're
you
a
know
lucky
what it feels.
person.
Yes, you're lucky, but you might know what it feels like to be in an environment where you don't feel safe, or
Yes.
surrounded by people who you're afraid of, or feeling unrecognized for your efforts, right?
Mm.
And so it's kind of zooming out a little bit and removing yourself from their exact scenario, but feeling into, oh gosh, what might that feel like? Oh, I know what shame feels like, or I know
Yeah.
what embarrassment feels like. And that's really what you're looking for.
If you picked up a copy of my best-selling book, How to Begin, Start Doing Something That Matters, well, there are additional downloads and templates and video you can get at howtobegin.com.